Welcome everyone to the 32-team franchise. This is Doomhammer giving you the free agency recap here in 2010. To start off, I'll go over some of the top targets in free agency and where they went, and then I'll break down by division and team of who was acquired. Starting off with one of the top free agents is Richard Seymour, the defensive end for the New England Patriots. He helped them win the Super Bowl this past year. Now, of course, the Patriots have so many good players and so many high contracts and salaries. They had no cap room for a player like Richard Seymour. So Seymour ends up having a lot of targets. A lot of people wanted to sign him, multiple teams, but he decided to go with the Arizona Cardinals. So the Arizona Cardinals lost the NFC Championship game to the Minnesota Vikings. They made a huge push this past year to be a contender with Phillip Rivers, but one thing they needed was some dynamic defensive player, and they're going to get that with Richard Seymour. Seymour is probably the best, if not one of the best defensive linemen, but also probably one of the best defensive players in the league. Next, we have Dante Culpepper, the Buffalo Bills quarterback. He is a 4-time MVP of the league when he was with the Vikings, had 2 years in Buffalo, missed the playoffs both years, went 7-10 and 9-8 last year. They did draft Josh Freeman, and Josh Freeman will be the quarterback likely moving forward for Buffalo and Mike Munchak. So Culpepper is one of the top quarterback free agents, and he has chosen to go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, there were a lot of teams that wanted him. Miami wanted him. The Giants wanted him. There's so many more. Let's see. I'm going to go through my list here real quick. So I mentioned Dolphins. The Dallas Cowboys wanted him. But the Denver Broncos wanted him. But he decided to go with Tampa Bay, which is interesting because I don't know, some people might be very excited about this move, but he is going to do the division with two of the top 2 defenses in the league. The Panthers were the second ranked and the Falcons were the first ranked. So they're very tough defenses here. And even Tampa Bay's defense is pretty good too. But Culpepper decides to go back to the NFC, decides to go to the NFC South. Probably the best quarterback in that division. Because you have Matt Leinart right now with the Saints. They also have the number 1 overall pick, so they'll probably have a rookie. The Falcons have Jason Campbell, who did play very well, but I don't think Campbell is as good as Culpepper is. And then you have the Carolina Panthers with Joe Flacco, who did okay. He's mostly had to be a game manager with a defense that's been so great. But Culpepper is going to be a great addition for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then you have Albert Haynesworth, another top-tier defensive prospect. You had Richard Seymour, and then you have Haynesworth. And Haynesworth decided to go to the Buffalo Bills. So the big man up front going from Tennessee to Buffalo. I am still debating whether or not I just tank his stats, because when he went to the Washington Redskins in real life, he had this huge contract and he didn't do anything for them. So I'm debating whether or not I do that or just allow him to be great. Then the tight end Jason Witten had several teams going for him. The Rams have Martellus Bennett, and so I decided that instead of keeping Jason Witten and paying him a big contract, the St. Louis Rams decided that they're going to let Bennett be their starter moving forward and let Witten test free agency. But Jason Witten ended up going with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, of course, there could have been other teams that he could have gone to, but Jason Witten going to Dallas is kind of like giving him the opportunity. He could have went to the Green Bay Packers, but it just wasn't in the cards. He could have gone to Denver, but that also wasn't going to happen. And so he ended up going with Dallas, so he's going back home, and we will see if he can help bring Dallas to some sort of prosperity. Then the best offensive lineman is Bryant McKinnie from the Vikings. And Bryant McKinnie is decided to go with the Carolina Panthers. So in this move, he is going to probably one of the best teams that have a great defense. He is now able to blindside block for Joe Flacco. And I'm sorry, my mind's not working tonight. Jeez. But he's going to be with Joe Flacco, protecting his blind side. A lot of teams wanted him, but best offensive lineman goes to the Panthers. Now, the Patriots did do a trade that helped free up some cap space. And so we see Patrick Surtain, who is over there with the Seattle Seahawks. And the Patriots end up using that free space to bring him in. He was the only free agent the Patriots signed this offseason. All they had cap space for. So Patrick Surtain will be in the backfield with Champ Bailey heading into this year. Then the best receiver was Roddy White with the Seattle Seahawks, and Seattle was more of a running team. They struggled to really pass the ball with Tarvaris Jackson. Even though there's some upside to Jackson, I know he's one of the top 14, but Roddy White decided to go to the Kansas City Chiefs. So here we go. The Chiefs went to the AFC Championship game and lost to New England. They have Marquise Colson, who had a fantastic postseason. But adding Roddy White gives Eli Manning one more option, and I look forward to using him in the offense. Next, we have Roman Harper with the Tennessee Titans, and he left them to go to the Chicago Bears. So probably the best safety, about late 20s in his age. So he's going to be a great defensive prospect for Chicago, helping their backfield. Chicago has been pretty weak for a while, so seeing this improvement is going to help their defense immensely. Then LaDainian Tomlinson is leaving the San Diego Chargers. He got that gruesome injury 2 years ago. Last year he was playing this season, but he kept getting hurt. They drafted Beanie Wells from Ohio State, and even though he's not rated highly, he is interpreted to be a very good running back for them. He is what's going to be their leading rusher this next year. And so Tomlinson decided to go to the New Orleans Saints. So the Saints have Felix Jones under Josh McDaniels' offense, and he did rush for, I think it was 1,000 yards. But adding Tomlinson gives them that extra talent, that extra rusher. And if Tomlinson gets hurt, who cares? They have Felix Jones. They can cover. They can also use Tomlinson in different situations, or even if they want to start Felix Jones and use Tomlinson as a role player, they can definitely do that as well. Then Dante Stallworth is making a comeback because he had a year-long suspension. He was previously with the New York Jets, but now he is free to go where he chooses. He was having considerations from the Cincinnati Bengals, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Detroit Lions. But in the end, he decided to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. So Stallworth is a Bengal, which the Bengals desperately need a wide receiver. They have a lot of older receivers. They had Michael Floyd, who was a big receiver, but it got to the point where Palmer didn't have that many good options other than his tight end, Tony Gonzalez. So I said they need to get a top guy here, and so they went in for Dante Stallworth, and they got him. Next, we have Tarvaris Jackson, another Seattle Seahawk, which is interesting how many Seattle Seahawks are in this top 14. And Jackson had a couple offers, but not many, but he ended up going to the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals are looking at moving Carson Palmer, and he will be traded this offseason, and they were only going to trade him, of course, if they had a replacement for him. And here it is, their replacement, Tarvaris Jackson. Next, we have the cornerback, Nate Clements. Clements has been a top cornerback in the league for a while. He was part of the Kansas City trio. They have Tim Jennings, they had Jonathan Joseph, and Nate Clements. All were like 82 to 84 and above. So they had some great DBs. But Clements, he's older, so the Chiefs decided to move on from him, and Clements decided to go to the New York Jets. So the Jets are able to get a top cornerback in a very tough division. Buffalo is a little bit less tough with Culpepper being gone, but still the Patriots just won the Super Bowl, and so having a defensive back like Clements is going to help them a lot. Then we have Andre Carter, who's with the 49ers, deciding to move on. And although the 49ers made the Super Bowl in back-to-back years and won one. Now they're going to move on from their old players after having a 6-11 season. And so the San Diego Chargers end up making the best offer to Andre Carter. A lot of teams wanted him, but he's 34 years old. And the Chargers have been the number one team for a couple seasons. And so they're trying to get to the Super Bowl and actually win in the playoffs with Aaron Rodgers. So they add Andre Carter, who's going to be a big boost for their defensive line, especially since the Chargers lost Luis Castillo, who was playing that same left end side. And the very last top free agent is Randy McMichael, who is the Miami Dolphins tight end. And Randy McMichael is moving on to the Chicago Bears. So he was one of the top tight ends with Jason Witten, but he ended up, and the Texans wanted him, the Titans wanted him, Chicago obviously wanted him, but he decides to leave Miami to go to Chicago. I think probably a money thing. So here we are with the division breakdowns. The Cardinals, they get Santana Moss from the San Francisco 49ers. So the Cardinal, he is now the Cardinals wide receiver, about 31 years old. They also pick up Eric Johnson, who was with the 49ers for a while. So kind of picking up some division teammates there. They also get Tramon Williams, the cornerback. The 49ers get Kellen Clemens as a backup quarterback for Drew Brees. Fullback and Troy Fleming. Wide receiver Jason Avant. Receiver is kind of a need for the 49ers, especially after losing Santana Moss. They get a tight end and Darren Fells. They get some backup O-linemen, basically. Colin Jenkins was sought after with Cleveland and San Francisco, but he chose San Francisco. Can't really blame him. Probably more upside with San Fran. Murrell D. Moore and Marcus Tubbs end up signing a little bit later in the free agency period. Rams bring in tight end Daniel Graham to sort of replace Jason Witten, not as their starter, but as a backup tight end to Martellus Bennett. Then you have Craig Dahl, a strong safety, signed with the Rams. Now, Seattle signs Vince Young after missing out on Dante Culpepper. Young is not a guaranteed starter. The Seahawks could trade for someone. They could draft someone. But Vince Young kind of is filling that role that Tavares Jackson played, so he can be that mobile quarterback if they need. They also get TJ Duckett from Cleveland, Chris Kimwatu, and Andre Woolfolk. And Andre Woolfolk was a first-round pick by the Patriots many years ago. He was not a highly overall person, but he actually played very well, and he is a Super Bowl champion. And now he is a Seattle Seahawks cornerback. Then Chicago, you got Richard Subert and Kyle Cook, Alex Barron, and Dominic Raiola. So a lot of offensive line help there for Chicago. They get Casey Hampton from Pittsburgh. We mentioned Roman Harper. And then they sign wide receiver Nate Burleson. They headed into this offseason with 2 wide receivers. So they are definitely heading into the draft needing wide receiver help. And they are going to likely do that. But they also add Nate Burleson, the veteran who was with the Cleveland Browns and last season with the Philadelphia Eagles. Lions get 2 O-linemen, Montre Holland and Junius Costin. And the Lions, they wanted other people, but Dante Stallworth said no and Quentin Jammer said no. The Green Bay Packers bring in Jerome Harrison from the Patriots. They have Mike Otto, left tackle, and Jimmy Wilkerson on DE. The Vikings bring in the first round pick, or it was the first overall pick in the second round that went to the Dallas Cowboys, wide receiver Chad Jackson. They bring in Jamal Lewis after he was cut from the New York Giants, who wanted to get a younger running back room. Dwan Edwards, Ben Hartsock, Rex Hadnot, Chris Spencer. So got some offensive line help as well. Then Tampa Bay, they were very busy this offseason as they landed their quarterback of the near future. They also have Donald Lee. They have Jason Hatcher, Anthony McFarland. They're bringing him back. So Anthony McFarland was with Tampa Bay. Then Anthony McFarland decided that he wanted to go and stretch his wings somewhere. Let me see. Where was he last year? He was with the New Orleans Saints last year. So he went to a division rival. Didn't really work out. Now he's back. They do bring in Mark Anderson, who was the best right end in the free agency class, and that was a steal from the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons lose a top pass rusher, and the Buccaneers pick him up. Quentin Jammer was one of the 3 top cornerbacks in this free agency class, and the Buccaneers land him. They add Lamont Jordan, an older running back now. I think he's 31 years old. They bring in Bobby Wade, who was with the Colts to start his career, and then he was with the Jets the past, I think, 2, and some depth center there with Jason Smith. Falcons, as you can see, Charlie Johnson, Rob Sims, Guy Wimper, getting some offensive line help. Again, a lot of offensive linemen were picked up this offseason, almost 2 to 3 for most teams. Then they also have Mike Montgomery, Adam Seward, Marquise Anderson, and tight end Jeff King. Panthers, they get a backup quarterback for Flacco and Charlie Whitehurst, who was with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They get Maurice Stovall at wide receiver. Biggest free agent there is Bryant McKinney. They have Jorge Cordova, Larry Turner, and Rashad Butler. Saints get, of course, LaDainian Tomlinson. They get the old veteran Javon Kearse, and then outside linebacker Stephen Cooper. Then we look at the Dallas Cowboys and the NFC East. They bring in Joseph Adai to be the backup for Adrian Peterson after Ricky Williams retired. They also signed Kenny Moore, the one young receiver. Jason Witten was big. Reggie Torbor was big. And then they have Tony Romo. So Romo could have gone to Miami, or he could have gone to Dallas. And those are the 2 teams that went after Romo after failing to get Dante Culpepper. And Tony Romo decided to go to Dallas. So I think this is going to be a unique opportunity in my franchise because you have Jason Witten and Tony Romo. Can they save John Harbaugh's career in Dallas? Can they become the Dallas that gets to the playoffs and loses in the first round? Can they be like Dallas of the modern day? We also have to find out Tony Romo is not a guarantee starter. He could very well be replaced. He could be. They could do a trade. They could draft someone. He's not seen as an 80 overall quarterback in this league. He's kind of seen as like a Kevin Cobb, a Derek Anderson, a Matt Castle, a journeyman quarterback in my franchise. Eagles, they're out there getting Chris Cooley, who was with the Tennessee Titans. He is now going to be their backup tight end for Heath Miller. They bring in Craig Terrell, and they bring in Lavernius Coles, who used to be with the Jets and the Bengals. The Eagles already have some top-notch young receivers in Ted Ginn and Deshaun Jackson, and so they add a veteran wide receiver to help just add some depth to that receiving core and some veteran leadership. Giants bring in running back Jarius Norwood to help bring some youth. I mean, maybe he's like 26, 27 now probably, but someone younger than Jamal Lewis. They also bring in wide receiver Devin Aroma-Shodu, who is not ranked highly overall, but he was a top receiver in the league because Peyton Manning was throwing him the ball. So the Giants will now have Devin Aroma-Shodu in that room. They bring in Alex Smith, the tight end, O-lineman John Stinchcomb. They add also Joel Dreesen to that tight end room, and Owen Harris at DT. Washington adds Josh McCown to their free agency room. His quarterback room. So McCown going to be in there to be the backup for Michael Vick. Good for him, right? And then we have Teo Johnson, Justin Smiley. And Justin Smiley was the best offensive guard in this free agency class. So good for him in getting that gig. They also bring in Ronald Fields. They bring in Steve Allen, 2 safeties, and James Butler and Brian Bonner, more so backup type caliber safeties. Wally Lundy at running back, he's probably not going to play much. Austin King at center, Julian Jenkins, and Tim Carrigal. Yeah, we'll go with it. Then we have Denver Broncos, Brett Kiesel from Pittsburgh coming in there as defensive tackle. He's normally been a defensive end, but since Pittsburgh's been a 4-3 instead of a 3-4, he has taken on that more of a 4-3 defensive tackle role. They bring in Matt McCoy and Brady Popinga as outside linebackers. Heath Farwell, who was one of the better middle linebackers in the class. Adam Archuleta I believe Adam Archuleta was from Chicago. Let me double check. And that question is, now, where is Adam Archuleta? He was with the Falcons, So he was with Atlanta Falcons. The Dolphins wanted him. You had the Broncos wanting him. But he ended up deciding to go with the Denver Broncos. And then we have Phil Dawson as the best kicker in the free agency class, leaving Cleveland. Jeff Hangartner, left guard. We see Kansas City, as I mentioned before, getting Roddy White, but they also get the veteran linebacker Keith Bullock. He might not even start, but he's got that veteran presence, that star power that's just providing more depth for Kansas City. And then cornerback Kelly Jennings. After losing Nate Clements, they get younger, but still keeping that trio of solid cornerbacks in a division that's very tough. Then we look at the Chargers, getting Joe Klopfenstein as a backup for Antonio Gates, Andre Carter, who's the best free agent acquisition for them, Sean Cody and Sharon Pearson, really shoring up that defensive line. Then Matt Moore gets signed to the Oakland Raiders to back up Matt Ryan. So we got the Matts over there in Oakland. Travis Henry, some veteran leadership in the running back core behind Sean Green. They also bring in an old receiver in Donald Driver because apparently Oakland is known for liking old players who are past their prime. Another Jason Brown going to the Oakland Raiders. So it was hard to figure out which Jason Brown was who, and so one of those things where I just didn't put a picture for them because I didn't know which one was which. But he ends up being there for depth. Then we have Darren College at right guard, Simeon Rice at defensive end, who is good, but he's very old. So again, getting old players. Leon Williams, a good addition there for them. Bo Rude, so another linebacking support. And then Daniel Bullocks at strong safety. As we get to the north, the Bengals were very proactive this offseason, getting Jackson to replace Palmer. We see Lendell White coming in at running back, a younger running back to help with Marino. Dante Stallworth, one of the best receivers available. Will Montgomery at center, some more depth. But Kevin Williams from Chicago, I mean, he was a top 5 pick several years back, and he is a good defensive tackle, going to help that defensive line. Carl Pema was a Vikings cornerback, and so he made the Super Bowl last year. Eugene Amano was a Cleveland center, so they poached from their rival. Leon Joe, middle linebacker, and James Ahidegbo, safety, filling out their roster there. Cleveland, probably their biggest splash was getting Billy Bajima. They have Gary Barnidge. They had Teo Johnson, who left. Billy Bajima is a Super Bowl champion because he was the backup tight end for the Patriots behind Leonard Pope. So the Browns think that they've got their guy, their Patriots tight end. Terrell Smith at fullback. He actually did play for the Browns, but he played for them, back in 04 or 05. But I brought him in now. Jesse Ainsworth, who actually was on practice squad for Cleveland. He's one of the weakest kickers in the league, but he's now on Cleveland. Lance Moore was signed as a wide receiver. Seth McKinney on the offensive line. Corey Williams, who did sign with the Browns I think he signed with them in 2008 in real life. Then Leroy Hill, some depth for a middle linebacker, and Eric Barton, who signed with them. Yeah, it's kind of ironic because Eric Barton was drafted by the Jets by Eric Mangini, and then when Mangini became a Cleveland coach, he brought Eric Barton with him. But in my franchise, Eric Barton had no connection with Eric Mangini, but I just thought, okay, Cleveland needs an outside linebacker, so let's bring him in. Ravens, they get Chris Chambers, who was great for the Texans. He was one of their top receivers, a veteran presence, and now they got to the point where Houston just needed to move on and get younger at receiver. So Baltimore brings in the old veteran, but they also signed Sonoris Moss from the Saints. Moss was drafted the same year as Brandon Marshall, but Brandon Marshall obviously was a later round pick, but way more talented. So the Saints keep Marshall and move on from Moss. Ravens get Jeff Dugan and Drew Coleman as well. Pittsburgh, you see them getting Ronnie Brown, where last year they signed Sean Alexander, who's still on the team. I don't know if he's going to stay on the team, or he might be the third running back just there as a veteran. But Ronnie Brown is going to definitely be a better role player at 27, 28 than Sean Alexander was, and that's just getting more depth behind Maurice Jones-Drew. They also signed Alge Crumpler. Crumpler's been with the Falcons for a long time. Crumpler has been the starter with the Atlanta Falcons, but here in Pittsburgh, he's going to be behind Delaney Walker. They also signed Mike Jones and Matt Roth, both more depth picks. Matt Roth might actually be more productive. Then we have Buffalo. Bruce Gradkowski, who's been a kind of a bounce around the league, was with Cleveland, got one start technically, but never really had a real chance to start. Was with Oakland when they ended up drafting Matt Ryan. And he is basically going to be he might get some chance to start. Josh Freeman is not guaranteed the starting job. I might consider starting Bruce Gradkowski, even though Freeman sat for a year under Culpepper. Gradkowski might end up getting some starts this season if Freeman doesn't seem to be the guy. They also bring in Khalif Barnes on the offensive line. They bring in several defensive linemen, so Hainsworth being the biggest one. Jarrett Johnson and Terrence Taylor, not bad either. Eugene Wilson at free safety. They do sign Lawrence Maroney at running back. We'll see if he actually makes it in preseason. Then we have the Miami Dolphins with a very simple Tim Dobbins, middle linebacker, probably their best pick. Sean Williams at strong safety. And then Jeff Smoker. They released John Beck. They still have Pat White. I expect them to draft a quarterback. They could go for a Tim Tebow if he's there. I'm very doubtful that Bradford will be there. We look at maybe Jimmy Clausen, Colt McCoy, Mike Kafka. So we're probably one of them. But Jeff Smoker is sort of one of my journeyman quarterbacks, and you've probably never heard of him. But he in my franchise, he's been with the Eagles. He's been with the Raiders. He's had some playing time even with Jacksonville. I think 2 years ago. He was like Charlie Whitehurst, Brian Brom, and Jeff Smoker were the three quarterbacks. So he's kind of that journeyman. So Miami is bringing him in. He's around that same overall as Pat White. So we'll see how that turns out. The Jets move very quickly in getting Ryan Fitzpatrick to back up Alex Smith. In some ways, I probably should have waited because Ryan Fitzpatrick could have been a starter somewhere. But the Jets claim him, and he's the backup. They have David Kurtman, who is the best fullback in the class, which doesn't say much, but he came from San Francisco. You have Derek Hagan from the Green Bay Packers going now to the Jets. The Jets end up trading Chad Ochocinco, so they try to get younger with Todd Haley's offense here, as he's the new head coach here in the Jets. Rocky McIntosh from Cleveland. We got Nate Clements, the Chiefs cornerback. Jeb Huckabee. Darren Sharper is one of the best free safeties. He's just 34, 35 years old, but the Jets don't care. They're just trying to get some talent. And then they have a not a role player, but a bench player in Jonathan Lewis. Patriots, Patrick Surtain, all they could afford. They're going to be filling out their roster in the draft because that's all they can do. Now we get to the last division, the AFC South. We see the Jets running back Leon Washington leaving the Jets and going to the Colts. Colts have Chris Johnson, and now they have Leon Washington. I'll see if the Colts are able to build a like Brandon Jacobs, Leon Washington Jets offense that I had so much success with years ago, or how the Lions have Reggie Bush and Danny Woodhead that are two good receiving running backs. The Colts now have Chris Johnson and Leon Washington, both running backs known for being good pass catchers. And so I want to see if I can get Manning and these running backs in these good pass options. So I'm very excited to see how that dynamic's going to play out. Colts get Luis Castillo. I think Castillo was, in real life, he was with the Chargers. In my franchise, he was with, he was with the Baltimore Ravens. And so now he's like the 12th ranked defensive end. So he's one of the top guys in the league. And so that's really cool that the Colts are able to build that depth. Then we have Kyle Vandenbosch, the outside linebacker, Todd Sauerbrunn. They get the best punter, but one of the older ones. And then defensive tackle Marcus Stroud. Stroud has been tanking in his overall. He's older, but he's just a big guy to plug up the middle. He was with the Jacksonville Jaguars, so kind of that divisional rival. Jaguars, not many big signings here. You got Dominic Byrd, Stacey Andrews, Tony Ronodi, Cody Glenn. I think Pisa Tinui-Samoa might be the best prospect between him and Travis Fisher. Travis Fisher, I think, is 30 years old, but he's like a 77 overall. So they get some more strength there at the DB position. Then Texans have Jake Grove, Rob Sims, the DT. I know there's like a Rob Sims center too. I'm trying to figure out where everyone went there. And then there's Chris Gokong, who was a pretty good running back. Let me see. In real life, he was with the Eagles. I'm trying to remember where I had him. Let's see. He was with the St. Louis Rams. So he goes to Houston to help their linebacking core. And then the Titans had a big offseason where Jamal Lord, who was like a 59 overall running back from the 49ers, who I always liked playing with. He was one of those unexpected guys, good role player. Wayne Hunter at offensive line with even Daniel Loper. Then some D-line like Stephen Bowen, Kedrick Golston, Marcus Spears. Marcus Spears being one of the best defensive ends that's in a decent age. He's not too old. He's in his prime. Good signing there. John Alston, Michael Boulware, and even Bart Scott, because Cleveland got rid of him. So Bart Scott went from an outside linebacker for Cleveland now to middle linebacker for the Titans. Now we're going to get to a few trades. So first one, Chad Ochocinco is out in New York, and he's now with the Oakland Raiders because Oakland likes old players past their prime, and they get a 5th-round pick in return, which, I mean, might have been a bit much for the Raiders to give up, but who cares? They did it anyways. They get a wide receiver for Matt Ryan, so someone with a more profile name. The Oakland Raiders with Bobby Petrino are going to do what Oakland Raiders and Bobby Petrino do. Colts, as you can see, trade for Jeremy Shockey. And now Shockey's a 31-year-old tight end. They probably overpaid with a 2nd-round pick. But they do have a later 2nd-round pick. And Shockey is one of the top tight ends in the league. So I expect Shockey to be really good for the Colts. Because other than Reggie Wayne, Manning did not have many options. They have PK Sam and some others, but they're not great. So getting Jeremy Shockey is a better tight end than Bubba Franks. And I think that's just it's a championship move. You're not worried about the draft. You're worried about getting talented players. Then the Bengals end up trading away Carson Palmer as expected to the Giants for a 2nd-round pick. And the Giants pick very high in the in the draft. So they get a 2nd-round pick, and then Strotter, just kind of a added pick there just to add some depth to the Bengals the Bengals receiving core. But Palmer going to the Giants is a great addition. I think they wanted to upgrade from Matt Schaub, and I didn't know how best to do that because there wasn't, other than Culpepper, and there wasn't really a quarterback on the block. So Palmer fit that mold of being a top pick, someone that you could say, yeah, this new coach in New York, Jim Caldwell, wants to upgrade from Matt Schaub. Matt Schaub is not a scrub. He's still good. But Palmer makes more sense for the Giants. He makes more sense for an upgrade. Then Matt Schaub gets moved for a 3rd-round pick. And so the Giants lose a 2nd, but they pick up a 3rd, and they send him to the Baltimore Ravens. And I think Schaub did play for the Ravens in real life. He was more of a backup behind Flacco. But Schaub is a good quarterback in my franchise. I'm just saying that he ran his course in New York, given he had a lot of his success because of Terrell Owens. But now he's able to be the starter in Baltimore, who is moving on from Jamarcus Russell. They have a new head coach in Al Saunders. So new coach, new quarterback. They have their guy. We'll see how it goes. I mentioned earlier that the Patriots made a trade to free up cap space. They already have good tackles with Jason Peters and Sebastian Vollmer. Now they get rid of Matt Light, who is way too expensive to be a backup tackle. They get a 5th and 7th-round pick from the Bengals for that. Bengals get their blindside blocker that they've been needing, their veteran presence, and Patriots get some draft capital, which they need to fill some of their roster spots because they can't sign people. So we have the Lions trading away Charles Rogers to the Seattle Seahawks. So Charles Rogers in my franchise is better than how he was in real life. However, one of those things where Seattle needs some help on the receiving core. They lost Roddy White, so picking up Charles Rogers makes a lot of sense for them. Then we have the Cleveland Browns trading for Kevin Kolb, only for a 6th-round pick. Kolb was a 2nd, 3rd-round pick in the draft to the Rams. He never was able to really get that starting job. Jay Cutler is now the starting quarterback for the Rams, so Kolb was just traded away for pennies, but he could very well be the starter in Cleveland with Jim Tressel head coach. And that concludes the 2010 free agency. Next up, the draft.